When people talk about old age and being alone, they speak as if something has gone wrong, as if life missed its mark. Buddhism sees it differently. It says this stage is not a failure of life, but the removal of illusion. When noise fades and dependency collapses, something precise becomes possible. The mind finally stands alone. And that is where real power begins. Aloneness destroys the need for psychological support. Most people say they fear being alone, but that is not the real fear. The deeper fear is losing the invisible structures that keep their inner world standing. Throughout life we lean on people, routines, noise, schedules, and constant interaction to stabilize our emotions. Conversations calm anxiety, presence distracts from restlessness. Feedback reassures identity. These supports are so normal that we rarely notice how dependent we have become on them. Buddhism looks at this dependence very clearly. It teaches that when emotional balance comes from outside sources, inner stability never fully develops. The mind learns to regulate itself through others instead of through awareness. This works for a time, but it creates fragility. When people leave, routines break or attention fades, the mind feels exposed and unsafe. What we call loneliness is often the sudden collapse of psychological support, not the absence of love. Old age naturally removes many of these supports. Friends become fewer, social roles dissolve, daily interaction slows. There is less distraction available to smooth over discomfort. At first, this feels deeply unsettling. Thoughts become louder, emotions feel sharper. The mind searches for something or someone to lean on and finds nothing. Buddhism does not see this as a problem. It sees it as the beginning of strength. When the mind can no longer outsource stability, it is forced to learn self-reliance. This does not mean becoming cold or detached. It means learning to stay present with one's own thoughts and emotions without immediately needing relief from outside. Anxiety arises and is observed. Sadness appears and is allowed. Restlessness comes and goes. Over time, the mind realizes something important. It does not collapse when unsupported. This realization is transformative. You begin to trust your own awareness. You see that emotions move on their own when they are not resisted or fed. You stop panicking at discomfort because you have survived it repeatedly. Buddhism calls this inner refuge. It is not built by adding more support, but by removing the need for it. Aloneness then becomes a training ground. Each quiet moment strengthens the mind's ability to stand without leaning. Each wave of emotion passed without escape builds confidence. What once felt like abandonment slowly feels like space. Space to breathe, space to observe, space to exist without explanation. Eventually, something profound happens. You stop measuring well-being by how supported you feel. You stop needing constant reassurance to feel okay. The presence or absence of others no longer determines your inner balance. This is not isolation. It is independence of mind. This is why Buddhism considers aloneness in old age a form of power, not because it feels pleasant at first, but because it removes illusion. When psychological support is no longer required, fear of loss weakens. You are no longer held together by circumstances. You are held by awareness itself. At that point, being alone is no longer a threat. It is proof. Proof that the mind has learned to stand on its own. Proof that peace does not depend on company. And when nothing external is needed to remain steady, you become unshakable in the deepest sense. Old age exposes the illusion of urgency. For most of life, urgency feels real, heavy, and unavoidable. Things must be done now. Decisions must be made quickly. Time feels like it is constantly running out. This sense of pressure shapes how people think, act, and judge themselves. Buddhism looks closely at this feeling and asks a simple question: is urgency a fact of life or a habit of the mind. In younger years, urgency is reinforced everywhere. Work schedules, social expectations, ambitions, and comparisons all create the feeling that delay equals failure. Even rest begins to feel guilty. The mind stays alert, tense, and reactive, always leaning toward the next thing. Buddhism teaches that this constant forward pull is not wisdom, it is conditioning. The nervous system learns to treat imagined deadlines as survival threats. Old age quietly dismantles this structure. Many of the forces that created urgency lose their grip. Careers slow or end. Social competition fades. External expectations weaken. The mind suddenly finds itself with time it does not know how to use. At first, this can feel uncomfortable or even frightening. Without urgency, some people feel purposeless, but Buddhism sees this moment as an opening, not a loss. When urgency falls away, something remarkable happens. The body begins to relax. The breath deepens, thoughts slow. You start to see how much of your previous stress was not caused by real danger, but by imagined pressure. You realize how often you rushed not because it was necessary, but because you were afraid of falling behind. Old age exposes this clearly because there is less to chase. Buddhism teaches that urgency narrows awareness. When the mind believes everything is critical, it cannot see clearly. It reacts instead of understanding. With fewer demands pulling attention forward, old age allows awareness to widen. You begin to experience moments without needing them to lead somewhere else. Eating, walking, sitting, and resting become complete in themselves. This shift also changes how decisions are made. Without urgency, choices are no longer forced by anxiety. You respond instead of react. You notice what feels aligned and what does not. Even difficult decisions become simpler because they are not rushed. Buddhism values this clarity deeply. Wisdom arises not from speed, but from steadiness. As urgency dissolves, fear weakens as well. Much fear is created by the belief that there is not enough time. When time stops feeling like an enemy, the mind softens. You stop measuring your worth by productivity or progress. Being replaces doing. Old age, through the Buddhist lens, is the stage where life reveals an important truth. Most urgency was never real. It was a story the mind told itself. When that story loses its grip, peace becomes possible, not because life is easier, but because the mind is no longer running from an imagined clock. Pain loses its power when it is no longer personal. Pain is one of the greatest fears associated with aging. Physical discomfort, loss of strength, illness, and limitation are often seen as signs that life is turning against us. Buddhism approaches pain with unusual precision. It does not deny pain, but it makes a crucial distinction. Pain is a physical or mental sensation, while suffering is the story we attach to it. Old age becomes the stage where this difference can finally be understood directly. Throughout life, pain is often interpreted personally. A headache becomes a problem. Fatigue becomes failure. Emotional pain becomes evidence that something is wrong with us or with life itself. This personalization multiplies suffering. Buddhism teaches that the mind instinctively adds meaning, blame, and resistance to raw sensation. What hurts is not just the pain, but the argument with it. As the body ages, discomfort becomes more frequent and less avoidable. This initially feels unfair. The mind asks, "Why me?" or "Why now?" But Buddhism invites a different relationship. Instead of fighting pain or turning it into a personal tragedy, you observe it as a process. Sensation appears, changes, and fades. Even intense pain moves. This observation does not remove pain, but it removes the extra layer of suffering built by resistance. Old age offers repeated opportunities to practice this shift. When you stop labeling pain as an enemy or a punishment, it loses its authority. You realize that pain is not attacking you. It is simply happening. This understanding reduces fear. You no longer tense in anticipation. You no longer amplify sensation by mentally replaying it. Buddhism also teaches that much suffering comes from the belief that pain should not be happening. Aging dismantles this belief. When discomfort is accepted as part of impermanence, the struggle relaxes. The body may still hurt, but the mind no longer collapses around it. This separation is powerful. Emotional pain works the same way. Loneliness, grief, or sadness feel overwhelming when taken personally. But when seen as passing mental states rather than identity, they lose permanence. Old age creates space to watch emotions without immediately reacting or explaining them. When pain is no longer personal, it becomes manageable. You respond with care instead of panic. You rest when needed. You adjust without resentment. Buddhism teaches that freedom does not come from eliminating pain, but from understanding it clearly. This is why old age can bring a quieter strength. Pain still exists, but it no longer defines you. The mind learns that it can remain steady even when the body is not. In that steadiness, pain loses its power to dominate your life. The past stops controlling you. As life slows down, the past grows louder. Memories surface more easily in old age because there is less noise competing for attention. Moments you thought were forgotten return without warning. Regrets, missed chances, old relationships, and unresolved stories replay themselves. For many people, this feels like being trapped inside their own history. Buddhism sees this not as a curse, but as a final opportunity for freedom. For most of life, the past quietly controls behavior. Choices are shaped by old failures. Fears are fueled by past pain. Identity is built from remembered roles and stories, yet this influence often goes unnoticed because life moves too fast to examine it. With fewer distractions, the mind begins to replay what it has been carrying all along. Buddhism teaches a crucial distinction. Remembering is natural, but reliving is optional. Memory itself is not suffering. Suffering comes when the mind treats memory as something happening now. Old age provides the time and stillness needed to see this clearly. When a memory arises, you can observe it instead of entering it. You begin to notice that the body is here, the breath is here, but the event itself is gone. This realization weakens the past's authority. You see how often pain was kept alive by repetition, not by reality. Regret softens when it is seen as a thought, not a verdict. Even painful memories lose intensity when they are allowed to arise without judgment or resistance. Buddhism also teaches that clinging to the past is a form of attachment. Old age naturally loosens this grip. You start to see that nothing in the past can be fixed or relived. This is not defeat, it is clarity. When the mind stops arguing with what has already ended, energy returns to the present moment. As the past loses control, identity lightens. You are no longer defined by who you were or what happened to you. You become aware of yourself as awareness itself, watching memory come and go. This shift brings relief. The weight of history begins to lift. Old age, through a Buddhist lens, is not about being haunted by memory. It is about meeting memory with understanding. When the past is seen clearly, it stops ruling the present, and when that happens, the mind experiences a freedom that was impossible when life was moving too fast to notice. Silence forces the mind to reveal itself. Silence is often imagined as peaceful, but when it first appears, it rarely feels that way. In earlier life, silence is easy to avoid. There is always something to listen to, someone to speak with, somewhere to go. Sound, conversation, and activity keep the mind occupied. Buddhism teaches that this constant stimulation is not harmless. It hides the true state of the mind. Old age naturally introduces long periods of silence. Fewer obligations, fewer conversations, fewer interruptions. When noise fades, the mind does not become quiet immediately. It becomes visible. Thoughts multiply. Old worries return. Fears, cravings, and restlessness surface. This can feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming. Many people rush to fill the silence again because of this discomfort. Buddhism does not see this reaction as a mistake. It sees it as evidence. Silence removes distraction and reveals mental conditioning. In stillness, patterns become obvious. You see how often the mind repeats the same concerns. You notice how it searches for stimulation, reassurance, or control. This is not happening because silence is harmful, but because silence exposes what was already there. Old age offers the rare chance to stay with this exposure. Without the pressure to constantly engage, you can watch the mind instead of escaping it. Buddhism teaches that awareness weakens conditioning. When a thought is seen clearly, without feeding it or fighting it, it loses strength. Over time, repetition slows. The mind learns that it does not need constant activity to survive. Silence also reveals how much identity is built through interaction. Without others reflecting you back to yourself, the sense of self becomes less solid. This can feel disorienting at first. But Buddhism points out that this instability is not loss. It is a loosening of false structure. What remains is awareness without narration. As silence continues, something shifts. The mind begins to settle, not because it is forced, but because there is nothing left to react to. Attention becomes steady. Sensitivity increases. You start noticing small details, breath, sensation, light, sound, that were always present but previously ignored. In this way, silence becomes a teacher. It shows you the habits that create suffering and the stillness that exists beneath them. Old age makes this teaching unavoidable. When you stop trying to escape silence, it stops feeling empty. It becomes revealing, honest, and quietly grounding. Emotional control moves back into your hands. For much of life, emotions are managed indirectly. When sadness appears, we talk to someone. When anxiety rises, we distract ourselves. When anger builds, we release it through action or explanation. These strategies seem normal, even healthy, but Buddhism observes something subtle. Emotional balance is often maintained by external conditions rather than inner understanding. Old age gradually removes many of these outlets. Social circles shrink. Daily interaction slows. Distractions lose their intensity. The mind can no longer rely on others to absorb, soothe, or redirect emotional energy. At first, this feels like loss. Emotions seem stronger because there is nowhere to place them. Buddhism sees this moment as a turning point. When emotional control is no longer outsourced, it must return inward. Buddhism does not teach suppression or forced positivity. It teaches observation. Emotions are treated as temporary mental events, not commands that must be obeyed. Old age creates the space to practice this directly. When sadness arises, it is noticed in the body. When fear appears, it is felt without immediate reaction. This simple awareness begins to change the relationship. As emotions are observed rather than acted out, their intensity decreases. You realize that emotions rise, peak, and fall on their own when they are not resisted or fed. This understanding restores authority to the mind. You stop fearing emotional waves because you have watched them pass many times. Old age also reveals how much emotional turmoil was created by expectation. When life no longer demands constant emotional performance, reactions soften. You no longer need to appear strong, cheerful, or successful. Buddhism values this honesty. Emotional control does not mean eliminating feeling. It means allowing feeling without being controlled by it. Over time, emotional stability becomes internal. Calm is not dependent on reassurance. Peace is not borrowed from others. Even difficult emotions are met with patience. This does not make life numb. It makes it clear. This shift is one of the quiet powers of aging. When emotional control returns to awareness, reactions slow, judgment weakens, and compassion grows. You are no longer pushed and pulled by every feeling. You remain steady in the middle of them. Identity collapses without resistance. For most of life, identity feels solid and necessary. You know who you are because of what you do, the roles you play, and how others respond to you. Titles, responsibilities, achievements, and relationships give structure to the sense of self. Buddhism teaches that this identity is functional but not permanent. Old age is where this truth becomes impossible to ignore. As years pass, roles naturally dissolve, careers end, social importance fades, physical ability changes. People stop asking as much from you. At first, this can feel like erasure. The mind may panic, wondering who it is without usefulness or recognition. Buddhism does not treat this panic as failure. It sees it as the mind clinging to a structure that was never meant to last. Identity collapses not because something is wrong, but because conditions have changed. Buddhism teaches that identity is built from repetition and reinforcement. When reinforcement disappears, identity loosens. Old age removes the constant feedback that once kept the sense of self intact. There are fewer mirrors reflecting you back to yourself. What makes this stage powerful is the absence of resistance. In earlier life, identity is defended aggressively. Challenges are met with justification and explanation. In old age, the energy to defend a constructed self often fades. When resistance drops, collapse does not feel violent. It feels like release. As identity loosens, awareness remains. You begin to notice that thoughts, memories, and labels arise and fall, but something stable observes them. Buddhism points directly to this observation. What you are is not the story, but the seeing of the story. Old age allows this insight to mature naturally. This shift can be deeply relieving. Without a fixed identity to protect, interactions become simpler. You stop needing to prove relevance. You stop measuring worth through comparison. Presence replaces performance. Buddhism teaches that suffering increases when identity is rigid. Old age softens that rigidity. When identity collapses without resistance, it does not leave emptiness. It leaves space. Space to be without explanation. Space to exist without definition. This is not loss of self. It is freedom from a self that required constant maintenance. And in that freedom, life becomes lighter, quieter, and more honest. Desire dies when its lies are fully seen. Desire drives much of human behavior. It promises fulfillment, happiness, and completion just beyond the next achievement, possession, or relationship. For most of life, this promise feels believable. Buddhism does not condemn desire, but it examines it carefully. Old age becomes the stage where desire's promises can finally be tested against experience. In earlier years, desire is fueled by energy, imagination, and possibility. The mind believes that something missing can still be found. Even when desire is satisfied, it quickly renews itself with a new object. Buddhism teaches that this cycle is not accidental. Desire survives by convincing the mind that fulfillment is always ahead, never here. Old age weakens this illusion. After decades of pursuing goals, the pattern becomes clear. You see how often desire delivered repetition instead of satisfaction. Achievements faded, possessions lost their shine, relationships changed or ended. This seeing is not cynical. It is honest. Buddhism values this honesty because it cuts through fantasy. As desire is seen clearly, it loses momentum. There is no need to suppress it. There is no moral struggle. When the mind no longer believes the promise, desire weakens on its own. Old age supports this process by reducing the intensity of craving. Energy turns inward. Attention shifts from acquisition to understanding. Buddhism teaches that desire causes suffering not because wanting is wrong, but because wanting is based on misunderstanding. We want permanence from impermanent things. Old age exposes this misunderstanding directly. When the body changes and time shortens, the futility of chasing lasting satisfaction becomes obvious. As desire fades, something unexpected appears, contentment without effort. Peace is no longer delayed. You stop scanning the future for completion. What is present becomes sufficient. This does not mean life loses interest. It gains clarity. Old age allows desire to end not in frustration but in wisdom. When its lies are fully seen, desire no longer controls the mind. What remains is simplicity, ease, and a quiet sense of enoughness that cannot be taken away. Attention becomes stable when nothing competes for it. Modern life constantly pulls attention outward. Messages, responsibilities, expectations, and noise fragment the mind into small, restless pieces. Buddhism teaches that attention is not just a mental function, but a form of power. Where attention goes, life is experienced. When attention is scattered, life feels thin and unstable. In younger years, competition for attention is relentless. Work demands focus. Relationships demand presence. Media demands stimulation. Even rest is interrupted. The mind rarely stays with one thing for long. Buddhism observes that this fragmentation is a major source of dissatisfaction. The mind never settles long enough to feel complete. Old age naturally reduces this competition. Many demands fall away. Fewer voices call for attention. The pace of life slows. At first, this can feel empty or dull because the mind is accustomed to stimulation. But Buddhism sees this as a rare opportunity. When nothing competes for attention, attention stabilizes. As attention stabilizes, experience deepens. Simple activities such as walking, eating, or sitting become vivid. You notice details previously overlooked: the rhythm of breath, the sensation of movement, the quality of light. Buddhism teaches that fulfillment arises not from intensity, but from clarity. Stable attention makes ordinary moments sufficient. This stability also changes the relationship with thought. When attention is no longer pulled in many directions, thoughts lose urgency. You see them arise without chasing them. The mind becomes less reactive. Concentration develops naturally, without force. Old age supports this because there is less pressure to multitask or perform. You are no longer required to split attention constantly. Buddhism values this simplicity. A settled mind is less prone to suffering. As attention becomes steady, contentment follows. You are not searching elsewhere while being here. You are fully present in what is happening. This presence is calming, grounding, and complete. Buddhism teaches that stable attention is a foundation for wisdom. When attention no longer competes with itself, insight becomes possible. Old age offers this condition naturally. In the absence of distraction, the mind finally learns how to rest. Fear weakens the moment you stop avoiding it. Fear survives through avoidance. As long as something is not looked at directly, it grows larger in the imagination. Buddhism teaches that fear is not only about danger, but about resistance to experience. For most of life, people manage fear by distraction, explanation, or escape. Old age gradually removes many of these options. In earlier years, fear can be outrun. Work, relationships, entertainment, and ambition keep the mind busy. Fear is postponed rather than faced. Buddhism observes that postponed fear does not disappear. It waits. Old age slows life enough for fear to surface fully. This can feel threatening at first. Without distraction, worries about health, loss, uncertainty, and death come forward. The instinct is to resist, to push fear away, or to analyze it endlessly. Buddhism offers a different approach. Fear is treated as a mental event to be observed, not a problem to be solved. When fear is met directly, something unexpected happens. Its intensity decreases, the body tightens, the breath changes, thoughts race, but none of this lasts. Buddhism teaches that fear depends on anticipation. When attention stays with present sensation rather than imagined outcomes, fear weakens. Old age provides repeated opportunities to practice this. Each time fear arises and is not avoided, confidence grows. You learn that fear does not destroy the mind, it moves through it. This learning reduces fear's authority. As avoidance ends, calm becomes possible, not because life becomes safer, but because the mind stops running. Buddhism emphasizes steadiness over control. Fear loses power when it is no longer resisted. Old age reveals this clearly. When fear is faced without escape, it no longer dominates life. What remains is a quiet courage rooted in awareness, not denial. Death enters awareness and strips life clean. For most of life, death exists only as an idea. It is spoken about, feared in the abstract, and pushed to the edges of awareness. Buddhism teaches that this distance is one of the main causes of confusion. When death is ignored, life becomes cluttered with unnecessary urgency, ambition, and attachment. Old age changes this relationship naturally. As the body weakens and time becomes visible, death moves from concept to presence. This does not always arrive dramatically. Often it comes quietly, through loss of peers, changes in health, or simple awareness of limitation. Buddhism does not see this as morbid. It sees it as clarifying. When death enters awareness, illusions begin to fall away. Many concerns that once felt critical lose importance. Arguments soften. Status becomes irrelevant. The mind starts asking simpler questions. What actually matters now? Buddhism teaches that this simplification is wisdom, not resignation. Old age allows this clarity to deepen because there is less pressure to pretend death is distant. When death is acknowledged, life becomes honest. You stop planning endlessly for a future that may not arrive. Attention returns to what is present and real. Fear around death also changes when it is faced directly. Buddhism encourages contemplation of death not to create anxiety, but to reduce it. When death is seen clearly, it becomes less mysterious. You recognize that everything has always been changing. Old age simply makes this visible. This awareness strips life clean of excess. You speak more truthfully. You waste less energy. You let go more easily. Buddhism teaches that remembering death sharpens appreciation for life, not despair. Old age offers this teaching without effort. When death is allowed into awareness, life becomes simpler, clearer, and more grounded. What remains is not fear, but presence. Nothing is missing when nothing is needed. Throughout life, the mind is trained to feel incomplete. There is always something to improve, achieve, fix, or acquire. Buddhism teaches that this sense of lack is not a fact of existence, but a habit of perception. Old age slowly dismantles this habit by removing many of the conditions that once fed it. As ambition fades and striving loses urgency, the mind is left without its usual goals. At first, this can feel empty. Without future plans to chase, some people feel directionless. Buddhism sees this moment as critical. When the mind is no longer leaning toward what is next, it has a chance to see what is already here. Old age reveals that much striving was driven by the belief that fulfillment was missing. Careers, recognition, possessions, and even relationships were expected to complete something inside. Buddhism teaches that this expectation can never be satisfied because it is based on misunderstanding. Nothing external was ever capable of providing lasting completeness. When striving ends, completeness appears quietly. This is not excitement or achievement. It is ease. You stop scanning life for what should be different. You stop measuring yourself against imagined standards. What remains is simple presence without demand. Buddhism describes this state as enoughness, not because life is perfect, but because nothing is required for it to be acceptable. Old age supports this realization by removing the illusion that there is still time to become something else. In this stage, peace does not depend on improvement. You are not waiting, you are here. This does not mean life has no value left. It means value is no longer conditional. Old age reveals a final truth. When nothing is needed, nothing is missing. The mind rests because it has stopped reaching. In that rest, freedom appears naturally. Old age and aloneness are not the closing chapters of strength. They are the moment when strength no longer needs to prove itself. When noise disappears, urgency dissolves, desire weakens and identity falls away. What remains is not emptiness. It is authority over your own mind. Most people spend their entire lives leaning on support, chasing meaning, running from fear, and negotiating with time. Old age removes those negotiations. It leaves you face to face with reality, without distraction and without illusion. And in that honesty, a rare power emerges. This is not the power to dominate, impress, or accumulate. It is the power to remain steady when nothing is added, to stay calm when nothing protects you, to be complete when nothing is promised. When you can sit alone without needing rescue, explanation, or escape, you are no longer weak, you are free. And that freedom is the real power. Buddhism has been pointing toward all along.